Hey guys, it has been around 100 or so days, actually more than 100 days, that we have been isolation here in my house, and I know that with a lot of people who have been either in lockdown or who have gone out of lockdown and are either re-entering it or just are dealing with all the things that are happening, and there's such a huge list of the things that are happening in the year 2020. It has become a time of great emotional overwhelm, and it's turned into a time where things are very, very difficult for almost everyone, almost too difficult sometimes to handle. I certainly am seeing a lot of unfortunate and devastating news from all over the world of people whose experiences of depression have taken the ultimate um, toll on them. I'm also seeing tremendous suffering amongst my friends and family all over the world, really, who are in this time where they're watching their family members um, who are in pain. Maybe they themselves are really going through a very hard time, politically, economically, health wise. It's just a very difficult time. And in these difficult times, I really wanted to talk about how we can take care of our mental health and really try and honestly take care of ourselves, make it through the year 2020, or however long this is going to turn out, and come out the other end, if not exactly the way we entered 2019. I don't think that's ever the expectation, but certainly with as much of our being, especially mentally, as much as our sense of self intact as is possible. Now, before I begin talking about ways that you can manage your mental health and improve outcomes, I want to talk about what the expectations are with regards to mental health. Being mentally healthy does not mean that you are happy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, like you are just jumping for joy, like nothing is going on in the world. That's a very unrealistic and almost, I would say, possibly unhealthy way of dealing with things. Um, Being mentally healthy means that you are capable of feeling the full range of emotions that a human being is capable of experiencing: relief, happiness, grief, anger, anxiety, depression, all of them. But you are able to navigate your way through them. You don't stay stuck in one emotion for too long, because that, whether that emotion is what society considers positive, like happiness, or negative, like, sadness or anxiousness. Um, Being mentally healthy really means that you're able to live your life in a way that you are able to manage all the emotions. Now, I do want to say that I'm not a mental health professional. These are just things that I have been doing or that I have seen work with other people. And also, two important notes to write down is that if you are concerned about, or if you are actually experiencing ideas of self harm or suicide, if you are intending to commit self harm, suicide, or you're planning on it, or any of these, self harming, or even harming others, if those are ideas that are coming to your mind, the content of this video might not be sufficient at all. And this is the point that you really need to see a professional, a psychotherapist, a psychiatrist, or someone, or a social worker to deal with those feelings, because we definitely don't want any harm to come to anyone. And then the second important note is that if you are living in a violent situation, if you are a victim of any kind of abuse, and you are currently in lockdown with a person who abuses you, either financially, sexually, physically, emotionally. There's a whole range of different types of abuse. Again, this video might not be entirely sufficient, and again, I would say that you might really think about, investing in mental health services, or going to authorities to possibly get to a safer situation. Safety is really very important before we can do any kind of, I think, maintenance mental health work. Certainly, that's what I think. But perhaps, with watching this video, you will be able to get something out of it, and that's really my hope. The way that I look at mental health is really interesting. My personal opinion is that our mental health, our capacity for any given day, it changes every day. And there's so many variables, what's happening in the world, what happened with us, how we slept, how we ate, whatever. It differs every day, our energy levels. And I think different events that happen throughout the day either increase our energy levels or decrease them. And with the COVID pandemic, I think that what I've gotten out of it is that before the pandemic really started, we all had ways in which we could cope. So that means that maybe, you would go to the gym and lift heavy weights, and that was, your way of coping. Or maybe you would go and watch a lot of movies in the theater, or maybe you would go run 5Ks or train for marathons, or just meet up with a lot of your friends and, just vent about whatever was going on. Maybe you could separate your identities as an employee from your work life by going to the office. For a lot of people, there were all of these things that were going on, and suddenly, like when the pandemic hit, a lot of those wonderful coping mechanisms that people had went away with the physical distancing. And that really so on the one hand, we had intense pressure from pandemic, political issues, economic issues, money issues, health issues, worries that were just mounting. And on the other hand, our coping resources just kind of shot down. And with this like massive imbalance that happened, I think that a lot of people didn't really know what to do, because we aren't really used to being at home for so long. 100 days is very unusual, even for the biggest of introverts, I would say. In fact, I can't say that because I'm a huge introvert. Having said that, we are in this world, and we have to figure out how to keep a balance of like the worries that are happening and then the ways that we are coping. So I want to divide this into like my approaches to like worries that are happening and what I'm doing about this. For the feelings that are coming up on any given day, you don't just wake up happy and go to bed happy. Your feelings change throughout the day. They change by person, by time, by environment, lots of different things. And so each of them need to be dealt with in some interesting ways. And here are some ways that I have used personally in the last 100 days. Actually, I've been using these for a lot longer than the last 100 days because I like to be very proactive about well-being. So I think these might be even something that you want to take out of the pandemic into your regular, normal routine. So for anxiety, actually, before I start this, I want to say a lot of times your rational mind, which is the mind that does numbers, which is logical, which just knows truth from reality, and the emotional side of your brain, the one that gets angry, that gets upset, that gets hurt, that gets happy, that gets excited, those two parts of your brain are very different, and they don't tend to talk to one another. So you can't really reason your way out of anxiety as much. I mean, possibly with a lot of training, but it's certainly not the default. So you really need to treat those two halves very separately. And that's also important because being able to detect what mood you are in is actually not as easy for a lot of people as you might think. While we have all read books that, anxiety feels like this or happiness feels like this, what people might not tell you is that anxiety and excitement sometimes feel very similar. And so sometimes, unless you have a very good body awareness of, oh, this is anxiety, or though, oh, this is excitement, or this is nervousness, that's happy nervousness versus this is dread, you need to be able to feel, okay, this is what emotion I'm feeling. And I found that, like, being able to tell from being able to map, like, okay, this is what my body feels like when it's having this experience, makes it far easier for me to, like, react to that emotion and, like, do something about it if it needs to be done, or just navigate through it, really, because I don't see any emotion as problematic. That can be very helpful, as opposed to just sitting and thinking, like, is it this. Almost always the wisdom of the body, as cliche as it sounds, is going to be able to be better. So yeah, so one of the biggest emotions that are coming up for people nowadays is anxiety. It's anxiety about so many different things, and some of the anxiety, it must be for things that might be a likely thing for them, but a lot of times anxiety actually covers things that are not really likely to happen. But at the time of you, when you're feeling anxious, you can't tell. Like I said, the rational and the emotional parts don't really talk to one another. So one is the way it is, and you have to manage it sometimes without reason. The way that I have done it is actually by making this jar. Believe it or not, this feels so, like, crazy, but it's actually super effective. It's called an anxiety jar. And so what I did was, what I do is, like, and it's full of a lot of my anxieties, as you can see. But effectively, if my mind starts racing, or some really anxious thoughts come up, I write them down, because I'm always so afraid of losing the anxious thoughts. Sometimes, when we're in that moment, we just want to keep them. And what I do is that I actually write them on, like, pieces of paper. That's always, I always have paper around, and so I have these pieces of paper. They have my anxiety written in, and then I put them in this jar, and then I close the jar. Having a physical jar really helps, because once you've acknowledged the anxiety, you've written it down, and you have stored it, you've respected it, I find that it really kind of goes down, and that's really helpful. The other thing is that if I'm getting anxious, I oftentimes have self-imposed rules where I will not interact with my partner along specific topics, because I get very nervous, and then when I get nervous, I that can be a problem, because then my mind starts racing. So kind of having personal boundaries, being able to communicate, oh, I'm feeling very anxious, let's just not engage in some other topics because I'm dealing with XYZ emotion. I think being able to communicate that is very valuable. The second thing that I do for anxiety is that I often write. I write a lot, and I am never without something to write down my emotions with. Sometimes I don't even draw. Sometimes I make math graphs. Sometimes I write numbers. It's all over the place. I'm a huge numbers nerd. So yeah, but I always, like, write it down, and you don't have to reread it. I don't think I ever reread my stuff, but, like, I write it, and then because I've written it, I can feel like, okay, like, if this comes up again, I can go back. But almost never does that happen. And yeah, so that's an important thing. With anxiety too, you might need to burn off some of the excessive adrenaline, or just cry it out. So crying can be very good if you're feeling very anxious. So can a light exercise, just walking 30 minutes on a treadmill, walking around, maybe doing some light stretches if your doctor's okay with it. Those kinds of things can really help. The second emotion that I think a lot of people are experiencing is that of depression. Now, experiencing depression as an emotion and experiencing, a depressive disorder, those are two different things. And if you are feeling, very depressed, and you're concerned that this is a clinical issue, this is something that you really want to bring up with your mental health practitioners, to make sure that they're also able to modulate things for you. Actually, the same goes for anxiety. But, like, for depression, with depression, the thing is that depression tends to, once you go there, it likes to keep you there. And so on a good day, I can usually come up with, when I have more energy, come up with, like, a basic routine of like, oh, if I end up waking up and if I can just do, these minimum things, oftentimes I find that I get more energy from that, and that can actually kind of break the depression cycle. So at a minimum, it's like, okay, fine, I shouldn't be in bed past noon. Like, really, that's not something that I kind of almost have to push myself if I'm having a very depressed morning. And then, there's some basic things like I will brush my teeth and I will eat a toast with peanut butter, which is like a very easy thing, and I will hydrate. So just three things that I have to do that day. Almost invariably, that routine, like having something in my mouth, like the mint flavor of the toothpaste, eating something, making sure that like my body's getting nutrition and good nutrition at that, and just even being able to just go from room to bathroom to kitchen is enough to like really prevent me from really spinning. Another thing that has been very helpful to me, and this might be also relevant to a lot of people with like browner skin tones that aren't able to get sufficient sunlight because of lockdown, is like a vitamin D lamp. You can do vitamin D therapy, and that really helps increase, it helps your body produce vitamin D, and that really can improve mood. I found it really remarkable. You can also take vitamin D pills if you are darker skin like I am, but certainly I think there's a lot of value to that lamp. I didn't believe it. I thought it was a little too. I thought it was too good to be true, but apparently it really does work. Um, Listen to some music that's upbeat if that you feel like it on a depressed day. That might be something that will help you, because music is really magical in that way. Similarly, for anxiety, listen to music that's a bit calmer can be very, very effective. The third emotion that I want to talk about today is anger, and there is a lot of righteous anger all over the world right now for all sorts of different reasons. People are upset that their families are not taking the COVID pandemic seriously. People are upset that there is racial discrimination, brutality, all of those, horrible things are happening in the world, and you get very angry. And the way that I've dealt with anger is two things. One, and actually some of this can be generalized to all the other emotions as well. One, for anger, I write, I work out very slightly, at a tougher pace than I usually do. So I would just walk faster as opposed to walking gently. I would listen to angry songs, or just take a hot shower, get over that feeling, or maybe listen to calm songs, or just be really angry for a bit, just sit with it. That can also be like very effective at kind of processing and being like, okay, yeah, okay, I naturally don't feel like angry anymore, and I'm done. But a very important thing that comes up out of anger, and that happens with anger management, is that I think that figuring out why we got angry, if this is not an emotion that we want to have a lot of. Like, I know a lot of people who are perfectly okay with like feeling angry for long periods of time. Personally, I am not in that boat, and if you are, that's fine. But if you're like me, and you want to have healthy anger, and that's fine, but you also don't want to be constantly angry. I've done two things. I have established some very, very significant boundaries on interactions with either people or with the media in general. And if I know that the climate of the world is a certain way this week, and you will almost invariably know from like Facebook or whatever, I just don't log into Facebook, or I've deleted Instagram like a while ago. I don't do those things, and this doesn't mean that you don't care. I think that there lies a degree of wisdom in knowing that going into an elevated state where you can't really do anything about it, and you're going to have to spend all that energy trying to come down, it can really deplete you. It can really truly deplete you. So having an understanding of, these are my challenges, and if I open up, certain outlets, and I get all this bad information, I might not be able to be functional for other things in my life that need me. I might not be able to go to work or focus or take care of my kids or be a good partner or all of those different things. So it's a question of, is this something that you have space for in life right now, given your life circumstances? And is the exposure that I'm getting really going to be beneficial? I think that you can be very pointed in the way that you are dealing with the problems that are coming up. You can be proactive. Maybe you can have a solutions based approach. Maybe you can read, you inform yourself. You can do a lot of internal work with that energy, trying to figure out, how can I be different, or why do people behave a certain way? And then that could help you, going forward. It would be a better, possibly a better contribution long term than just sitting on your sofa and getting really, really riled up with nowhere to go. So that's very important. The In addition to like digital boundaries, you could also establish like boundaries with friends who are perhaps not really taking the pandemic too seriously. And within all of those things, I think it's very important to understand and accept, and this takes a very long time to do, but it is possible, that your circle of control in the world is very tiny. And the vast majority of the world will do what it needs to do, whether or not you like it or not. So the question really becomes, what is it that I'm willing to accept from outside the world? And I think boundaries really help. So certainly, and boundaries are flexible too, depending on situation. Um, be aware of your boundaries, be aware of what your circle of control is going to be aware of where your emotional energies are for a given day, and then act accordingly. I have certainly had days when I have had more energy to really do things about causes that are important to me, and there are days when it's like, okay, no, we have to like just get away from all the social media and everything, and just focus on something that I can do within my circle of control. The fourth thing that a lot of people are dealing with is grief. There is so much grief out there, and so much that is to be grieved. You could be grieving, for example, the loss of normalcy. You could be grieving the loss of a normal social life, a normal work life, a paycheck. Um, you could also be unfortunately grieving the loss of a beloved actor, a friend, a relative. You could be just grieving the loss of not being able to Lysol your groceries multiple times a week. All of those things can lead to a lot of grief, because our world has dramatically changed. You could be grieving the loss of so many fine young men and women who have died in the United States from not just COVID, but from all sorts of political reasons, and bias and all of those things. Grief needs to be processed. It's a very difficult thing to process, and it is a more long-term emotional state that stays. But being able to understand, label it, and then working actively to resolve those feelings, understanding the fact that there's a good bit of denial in grief, there's a good bit of rage, there's a good bit of bargaining, before there's any sort of acceptance. That's really good. And for you, if grief leads to panic, as it does in a lot of people, what I find really helpful is these bubbles. These are also really good for anxiety, actually. You could just open them up, and this doesn't really change the loss, but it slows you down. Because if your mind is racing, if you are overwhelmed, if you're just sad, taking a deep breath sometimes feels like a chore. And when you blow bubbles, actually you are elongating that exhale, and that's really when your, I believe it's the parasympathetic nervous system, slows down and gives you space to process. Other ways of dealing with grief, are certainly, there are many things you could, do a lot of self-care, see how that feels in your body. Some people feel very cold from grief, so sometimes they will use a little bit, like a 5-minute thing of being in a heated blanket. Some people, if they are very much bereaved, will stop eating, kind of trying to stay on top of that would be important. Some people will go the opposite way, in which case working with a dietitian, actually in both cases working with a dietitian, possibly to like modulate that might be of interest, but sometimes it's just things are hard and you have to, do whatever it takes to make it through the moment, and that's fine. Um, but there are also some positive emotions that might be coming up. You might be happy that your family is safe. You might be excited that possibly now things are going to change in the world. You might be relieved that you don't have to commute every day. And it's a difficult time to be happy as well, because a lot of people are so sad. So even if you're happy, like finding ways to like accept that yes, I am happy. Maybe dance, maybe listen to music, maybe paint, maybe write, just journal it all out. Celebrate it with someone who's near and dear to you, who you think would be able to celebrate that. All of those things are very important. um, those are some great things. And the same really goes for joy and laughter and all of those difficult things. Like you can sit with them and allow yourself to feel them and accept them and be in them, because you are a human being. You're gonna have the full range of emotions. Some other things that we've done now that we've talked about dealing with some of the more difficult emotions is that in order to be in a small apartment and have two people here, uh, it's very important to develop your own little space. So we have both actually, we spent the first couple of weeks of pandemic actually doing that. So for my space, which is this space, I can come here. Usually it's decorated to my taste, which is not to say that like my husband never comes here. He comes here. We talk all the time. But this is like kind of a me time thing. If I want space just to be with me, this is my space in the house, and I can stay here for like 24 hours a day. Like that's fine. And similarly, my partner has his own room, and it's very optimized for him and what he wants, and like he has that. And what's good about that is that we are not constantly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in each other's faces. I have hours and hours on in the day when I don't see him, and he has hours and hours in the day when he doesn't see me. And that has actually helped, because then you almost if you're having too many interactions, you might not have space to deal with your own things in your own way before, and so that can not that's not always a good thing. So having space in a relationship is actually very good. It's healthy. And then one other thing that we are doing, we've been very proactive about it, is that if we are in a heightened emotional state, we have to communicate that today I am feeling very anxious, so please do not tell me if something horrible happens on Facebook or whatever you might have. Or okay, today I have more capacity, so like let's talk. And then finding like a more meaningful way to connect, even if it is just 30 minutes in a day or less, that is important. So we've had to be very mindful about separation as well as coming together. And if you are living with your parents, if you're living with a partner, if you're living with children, if you are living with siblings, whatever your living situation is, it is important to realize that you do need your time that is separate, and it, I think, honors the relationship. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and that's fine. The other thing that we've both been kind of more mindful about is exercising, because sitting at home for 100 days can atrophy your muscles in interesting ways. So I'm very slowly like kind of going back and doing some more walking, doing some gentler stretches, keeping that back and the rest of your body, really arms and legs, especially because we're not like 13, and I mean a lot of 13-year-olds are in very good health. We're closer to 30. So with all of those things, you kind of have to be more proactive about, okay, am I eating like ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Or and occasionally that's okay, but if it becomes a routine, it becomes problematic. If you're not walking at all for days on end, your back starts to hurt, your muscles weaken, your posture goes bad. All of those things are problematic. And pain, generally the part of your body that detects pain, It's the same whether it's emotional pain or if it's physical pain. So you kind of want to reduce like physical pain, processing that your body has to do. So try your best to eat healthy. I know it's not always easy, but have some easy go-to meals if you can find them, like bread and peanut butter. If you're not allergic, is a pretty good one for the most part. Oh, this is very important. Hydrate. Be very mindful about hydration. You need, depending upon, well, for my body weight, I think I need 2 of these in a day. So I fill them up in the morning and then once again in the early afternoon, and I drink it. Dehydration will mess up your mental health so fast you wouldn't even know what happened. Um, Same thing with, possibly not eating things that are very good for you for more than, a meal or 2 or 3, 4 days. If you do that, yeah, it's gonna start doing things, because we have to understand that mental health requires like good physical health can really, boost mental health. It's not strictly necessary, but it can be a huge help. So with movement, with hydration, with water, by being proactive, by journaling, using the anxiety jar, blowing bubbles, managing space, creating boundaries, all of those things. And these are huge topics, by the way. You could spend an hour talking about each of them. um, you can try and like navigate them. So my hope from this video is that, if this has been a difficult time for you, I hope that you will possibly, understand that there may be ways that you can work through some of the more difficult aspects of, all the emotions that are coming up, and possibly find some interesting, weird, but somehow very effective ways to deal with them. And again, if these don't work for you, and they well might not, if they don't, then there are people out there who can figure out, um, who can help you, manage things better. um, that would be very good. And as I'm closing, I realized that one thing that I did forget to mention is the Headspace app. They are not sponsoring me in any way, but it's a meditation app. And there's like, and if you're not into meditation, that's fine. It took me years to get into it, but it can actually be very relieving. Like, just to relax and take care of your breathing. It can be very effective for any emotion, really. That's the great part about it. It almost always works. So just maybe take 3 minutes in a day. I think even taking 3 minutes in a day for headspace and meditation, or doing any kind of spiritual practice. If you're Muslim, pray. Do your namaz. If you're Hindu, do puja. Do something that resonates with you. Garden, for a lot of people, that's a good one. I've actually started. Well, I have a little mint growing outside, and I like to call that my garden. But yeah, I mean, do anything that connects you with like the larger universe, the larger world, whether it's gardening or meditating or something else. Certainly do these things, and know that this, God willing, will pass, and you will make it out. God willing, and it will be different, but hopefully you will come out knowing that you managed to deal with all this difficulty, and that you can do this. And I really hope that, once all of this is over, you have a lot of things that you are dreaming about, places you can daydream about traveling to nowadays. Use your imagination to maybe like fly over the Maldives or whatever you want to do. Maybe like Google some images, make a bucket list, find, imagine and hope for, a future that's different than our current reality. And I think that with those things, I hope that you're able to achieve them, once all of this is over. So yeah, that is what I had to say about reclaiming or perhaps maintaining our mental health in difficult times. Yeah, have a good night.